You know, there comes a time in every franchise when you just need to stop, and some film series die young, and Jaws is one of the many examples of that, with dumb executives almost ruining Jaws 2, and since the studio would not learn from past mistakes, Jaws 3 would be spanked by movie-going audiences as a result. In the third chapter, the keepers of the flame for Jaws that represented creativity were David Brown and Richard Zanuck, who had been there since day one. Zanuck protected Spielberg during the first film, and although he had serious personal issues against Sid Sheinberg during the second film, Zanuck never tried to control or mandate creative things and decisions by the directors. In fact, it is well documented he always asked them to do things, and if they did, he showed appreciation. If they didn't do what he asked, he would not hold grudges. This is verifiable fact. David Brown was also loved by pretty much everyone in the Jaws films, and these two producers would obviously be the best choice to continue the franchise. Zanuck and Brown got in collaboration with producer Marty Simons, who just did National Lampoon's Animal House, and he had an idea of making a funny Jaws film called Jaws 3: People Zero. Simons gave them rough ideas of how he would incorporate humor into Jaws 3, and Brown and Zanuck thought it was a unique way to go, and they hired none other than John Hughes and Todd Carroll to script the project. The script for the film would be finished by the summer of 1979. The beginning of the film was to have Peter Benchley writing his book for Jaws 3. He takes a break, dives into a swimming pool, and would be eaten by a shark that somehow got in his pool. Benchley is buried at sea, and when his coffin doesn't sink, they pull out machine guns and shoot it full of holes so that it will sink. We then cut to a movie set where the director of Jaws 3, named Steven, is trying to get his crazy production under control. First of all, he pleads with his main producer to get his lead actor's mother off the set, because she's Italian and won't stop cooking and won't stop feeding her boy, who is now over 240 pounds and looks nothing like he did when they started rolling the cameras. The producer acts like he cares, but he really doesn't, and Steven quits the project. Instead of dealing with the actor, the producer decides to go swimming in the ocean with one of the film's actresses, and it is there he dies by a shark. With the producer dead, it is discovered his will gives a woman named Irma his share of the studio making the film. This causes Irma to become the chairman of the board. With her being a bigwig and her son, Sonny, a fan of science fiction, the dimwits at the studio offer him a chance to write and direct the Jaws 3 film, which is in limbo. They hope that the son will fail to make his mother look terrible and cause her to resign her position as chairman of the studio. While people are trying to sabotage Sonny directing the film, Sonny helps them by making lots of mistakes, and he constantly plans to fix mistakes in post. However, there are other problems. A real shark is literally sabotaging the film. When they use the new mechanical shark, Bruce 3, they discover that while it was underwater, it was broken in two. However, two divers inside survive. Sonny starts getting it on with an actress on the set when his girlfriend shows up, who tells him she traded sexual favors to hitchhike all the way from Idaho to Hollywood. She is not angry Sonny is cheating on her. Rather, she is disappointed he did not save himself for her because they have not been together that way, even though she has a laundry list of men she's been with. By the end of the shoot, the shark is causing chaos, and during the final shots, the shark is literally destroying their sets, and the crew decide to just shoot it, knowing they are most likely going to die, so at least they can film it. Sonny stands up to the shark and lectures it, and the shark is intimidated and swims away. With a successful film shot, we cut to the premiere, where Sonny's ex-girlfriend, Wendy, arrives to see the film covered in diamonds and married to the oldest rich man in the world. Sonny and his mother smile at the success of his film. The film ends with a shark standing on its fin under a marquee that says "Coming Soon, Jaws 4." Joe Dante was eyed to direct the movie, and Richard Dreyfuss was targeted to return, while Bo Derek and Stephen Furst were also slated for the project. Yet at the studio there was rumbling from some of the folks who worked on past Jaws films. Verna Fields and Joe Alves were very offended that someone was making a movie joking about those who made the movie, but they didn't need to make too much of a stink because the person who refused to direct Jaws 2 returned. You remember that guy who said making a sequel to anything is just a cheap carny trick, returned to destroy the project righteously. Steven Spielberg basically told Universal Studios that he would never work with the studio again if they proceeded with Jaws 3 in its current iteration. The studio was already on the fence because not only spoofing Jaws made them uncomfortable, but they also wanted a Jaws film to return and be rated R rather than PG. They wanted to go full horror, and Zanuck and Brown were against this. So the entire project fell apart. So I guess it should be said, thank you, Steven Spielberg, for preferring the Jaws 3D approach with a one-time director, an ensemble cast who snorted coke constantly, and a gimmick for the core of a film, rather than a creative project consisting of Zanuck, Brown, John Hughes, Joe Dante, and Richard Dreyfuss. Knowing that Jaws was going to be shaped by further egos and they could not make it into something different, Richard Zanuck and David Brown walked away, choosing to back a different creative project called Cocoon, collaborating with a fairly new director like Ron Howard. Zanuck and Brown sold their rights, and this leads us to a new producer who bought them. This was Alan Landsberg, who was experienced in television movies and television shows. Landsberg was the type of producer who did things cheap and fast, and some at Universal worried that he was bad for the franchise. So they sent Joe Alves to talk to the new producer, and the producer was receptive to him. He hired him as production designer right away. It was Alves and Landsberg who both decided to go ahead with turning the movie into a gimmick. Experimental filmmaker Murray Lerner was sent the script in hopes that he would direct, but when he saw the script, Lerner stated, "My heart sank when I was sent the first script of Jaws 3D. I can't really get involved in this." But producer Alan Landsberg believed the idea for Jaws 3D was a megabucks blockbuster, no matter what anyone said. And since he couldn't convince any directors to take the job, he turned to Joe Alves. Landsberg decided, what the hell, it would be perfect if Joe directed Jaws 3, right?
Wrong.
The script evolved in many evolutions, but the main writer that was tapped to make this movie was Richard Matheson, and he was no flake. He was the author of The Omega Man, Somewhere in Time, Stir of Echoes, and tons of other things. But once again, Universal and dumb executives came down with mandates. Some of the mandates they wanted were to put the two Brody sons in a movie together, make the shark from Jaws 2 who was electrocuted still alive and looking for revenge. They wanted it to be in a park, and make sure you have a role specifically for Mickey Rooney, who is not available anyways, to be in this movie. Then you can waste more time rewriting the script. It was such a waste of time, and their mandates were just ridiculous. Matheson only did what he could, and in the end, this is what he had to say. I'm a good storyteller, and I wrote a good outline and a good script, and if they had done it right, and if it had been directed by somebody who knew how to direct, I think it would have been an excellent movie. Jaws 3 was the only thing Joe Alves ever directed. The man is a very skilled production designer, but as a director, no. And the so-called 3D just made the film look murky. It had no effect whatsoever. It was a waste of time. Sure enough, script doctors came on board to, make the film better, and one of them was Carl Gottlieb. Then the casting began, and Roy Scheider made sure they would never ask him to be in it by stating he took the film Blue Thunder to make sure he was clearly unavailable. Instead of hiring stars, they went for actors that were known but not that known. Dennis Quaid had been in a lot of films to date, but was not a huge star yet, and you can tell what he thought of the production of Jaws 3 because he stated there was not a single frame you see him in the movie that he is not coked up out of his mind.
Drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs.
Little-known performers like Bess Armstrong, who I simply loved in the cult classic Jekyll and Hyde Together Again, and Simon McCorkindale, who appeared in a cheesy but fun film called Sword and the Sorcerer, where he played the character Prince Micah. Leah Thompson and John Putsch were unknown to film at the time. The only star they really had was Louis Gossett Jr., who would win an Academy Award for An Officer and a Gentleman during the Jaws 3D production. The entire film was made around the 3D concept, and there was never a thought about the legacy of this film for home viewers after it left the theater. As a result, the effects are terribly dated, awkward, and somewhat comical, and it was clearly done for money rather than the artistic desire to tell a story that would stand the test of time. To be honest, the shark actually looks worse than the first or second Jaws. Don't they have someone who cares about production design or how to film effects? Oh, right, the director. Jaws 2 was considered a rip-off by many, but the truth is, 45 years later, you can still watch Jaws 2, and it looks fine. Jaws 3, well...
I am very disappointed.
Now, I don't want to be the type of critic that ignores facts, and therefore we have to give Joe Alves some credit. When they first started filming this movie, they had outdated equipment, and then they had to rush constantly to film the movie for lost time. Landsberg wanted it done fast, period. Also, Alves was not allowed to have final cut. It would be the producer who demanded 20 minutes of character development scenes to be cut from the film, because obviously he was thinking of making a classic rather than how much tickets he could sell in a single day. If you watch this movie and it feels like a television movie, that's partially because it was edited like a television movie from a television producer. For merchandising in 1983, it was a ghost town, unlike other Jaws films to date. There was no novel, because no one took it seriously. There was a soundtrack, which sounded subpar at best, with some John Williams notes mixed in, and even the trading cards were released with the 3D gimmick. The cards themselves came with 3D viewers, and on the back of all the cards were 3D pictures that would look different after you viewed them through the glasses. How unique! But it sure didn't help their value, because the card makers spent so much on the glasses that they didn't make stickers, and a set was only 44 cards. That's right, with only 44 cards to complete a set, you didn't have to buy many packs to finish it, and there were tons left over after the movie was finished in theaters, meaning that only a few dunderheads like me insisted on buying these cards, as I bought every movie card that came out back in the day. When it came out on July 22nd, 1983, Return of the Jedi was ruling the box office. On its first week of release, Jaws made $20.2 million, as everyone went to the theaters unaware of what they were in for. It was the first film to beat Jedi out of its top spot, and it jumped over John Travolta's sequel to Saturday Night Fever to retain the #1 spot for that week. The problem was, people had the ability to speak, and that did not bode well for this movie. During its second week, Jaws dropped 46.2% and made only $10 million. The next week, it did the same thing, dropping another 46 6.1% to the number 5 spot, nabbing $5.8 million. Other movies like Risky Business, National Lampoon's Vacation were pouncing this film. From there, it simply fell off a cliff, making just $3 million the next week. Then, it dropped like a rock. In a season where Cujo, Mr. Mom, Trading Places, War Games, Octopussy were at the box office, it just didn't belong like Superman 3, which just came out at that time as well. Like Superman, Jaws 3 was a representation of a cash grab with a gimmick. And once those pesky people started conveying that the two sequels sucked, they dived quick. In the end, Jaws 3 would make $45.5 million domestically and $42.4 internationally, with a total of $87.9 million worldwide after an $18 million budget. When it came out in 1983, it was trashed by critics and audiences. I saw it when I was a bright, happy 11-year-old who gobbled up every movie he could see. I even took public buses whenever I had any money in Toledo to see movies at the Southwick Mall AMC Theater by myself. It was rare that I went to these movies, though, because I spent my money on trading cards and Star Wars figures. I didn't see Jaws 3D at the theater, and that's one of the main points that the gimmick didn't work, because I was this film's target audience and I could see the disaster a mile away. I was one of those kids who had to pick a movie to see once every few months in theaters, and Jaws 3D was not going to win over the other films that were out at that time. I saw it for the first time on television, and I was shocked how bad it looked. My 11-year-old's mind response was real simple.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Yeah, I use that language. I was from low-income projects, and my mother taught me that language as well, so I was ready for those R-rated movies at an early age. Regardless, a gimmick defined Jaws 3 and ruined its legacy, and that could have been seen a mile away from a professional producer. Joe Alves is a magnificent production designer, but the directing in this movie is schlocky, and there's a lot of cheese moments in this film. The 3D was the focus, not the story or the characters. There were romances, money men, and a park as well, and customers to save, but in the end, the entire movie revolved around how and when do we utilize the 3D in the film. And every time those scenes appear, it takes you right out of the movie, because it is recognized for what it is. Do I hate this movie like so many contemporaries out there? Well, no. I can watch this movie every few years, and I own the DVD, but the truth is, this film is simply a Pinto that can drive you to point A to B. But ask yourself, do you really want to own a Pinto? The only thing I was really impressed with in this film was when the diver was trapped inside the shark as it crushed him inside. It was a creepy and disturbing moment worthy of a Jaws sequel. But that's about it. It was an effective shot. With that said, let's go to the next Jaws movie and, oh boy. Well, it's time to cover Jaws the Nepotism. The Revenge.
Hey.
In 1986, Universal needed some money, and since Jaws 3 made $87.9 million, why not return to the franchise? This decision was made by Sidney Sheinberg, who pretty much manipulated Jaws 2 for his wife's benefit. Creatives be damned. So right up front, no creative wanted to make this movie. It started from an executive who wanted his wife to get some work. So this didn't get the movie off to a great start.
No shit.
In this film, Ellen Brody was to be the main character, period, because Sheinberg's wife hadn't been in a movie for many years. Sheinberg tapped Joseph Sargent to direct it in September 1986, and he wanted it out by July 1987. That meant that Sargent had 9 months to cast, write, film, and edit this movie. Jaws the Revenge was a ticking bomb waiting to go off. The expectation and foresight was foolhardy of Sheinberg because there was no time, and because of this they struggled in early writings to make the shark interesting. To compensate, they came up with the brilliant idea of magic, voodoo specifically. It was voodoo that drove the sharks to hunt for the Brodies.
Fucking voodoo magic, man.
We thought that maybe if we take a mystical point of view and go for a little bit of magic, we might be able to find something interesting enough to sit through. Roughly translated, just make some garbage up to make sense of this mess. But did audiences really need to sit through this? Or would they just react like this? Anyways, the script and casting was finished by January 23rd, 1987, under the title Jaws 87, and completely ignored the running canon of Jaws 3, which was a bad foreshadow of what was to come in the future for Hollywood. Any movies that can't respect the foundation from whence they came are usually bad movies. Maybe they should show this movie in film classes so idiot producers, directors, and studios realize that continuity actually matters. A film can't be taken seriously if it ignores previous films or established characters. Just call it a remake, not a sequel, if you intend to do this. Watch this movie, filmmakers, and learn.
Now, who can argue with that? Robert!
And to go even deeper in this, the writing of this film mirrors modern-day Hollywood writing without any depth or care. It translates like this.
Forward to tell Vernon to be
Richard Dreyfuss was approached to appear in the film, but he could smell this one far away. Scheider was not even an option. Michael Caine was a big draw, and he just signed on to be part of a big franchise and cash in, which he would, and every video that talks about this film on YouTube mentions what he got with the money, so we don't feel the need to piggyback on what has already been reported over and over again. Filming happened on February 2nd, 1987, and then they moved to the Bahamas on February 9th, 1987. Filming would complete on May 26, 1987, giving the film a month and a half to finish the editing, effects, marketing, and hopefully get the sound right. I can just hear the sound editor saying to the director about doing serious sound mixes.
You were serious about that?
Oh, I'm getting dumber thinking about this movie. I mean, I literally feel brain cells running out of my head in horror. Focus, focus. I just need to get to the end of this video.
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
Okay, this movie could have been so much more. Universal was going to hire Industrial Light and Magic to create a beast like the effective Star Trek IV model, and the designers said it could work for a shark, but instead they hired another dude to do the job. How did that age? The film cost $23 million and looks like it cost $5 million. Since everyone knew this was going to be a big hit, the merchandise rolled out. There was a novelization, a soundtrack, and maybe you shouldn't have rushed the movie out, Sid. Anyways, upon its release on July 17th, 1987, somebody might have cared. I remember seeing every movie at theaters when it came out by this time, but I didn't pay for this one. I was only 15, and I could smell this turd a mile away. Plus, I remembered Jaws 3. Besides, who would want to see this when you could go see RoboCop, Spaceballs, Inner Space, Beverly Hills Cop 2, The Untouchables, Predator, Revenge of the Nerds 2, Full Metal Jacket, The Witches of Eastwick,
And all other shit you ain't never heard of.
Everyone knew it was a soulless rush for cash, and it opened to only $10.4 million. During its second week, it only made $5 million, and sequel junkies had a new disaster to witness in Superman 4, so it dropped further to 6th place. In its third week, Jaws 4 sunk to a rightfully deserved 12th place, and then was out of theaters altogether thereafter, when The Lost Boys and Living Daylights pounced this film. Jaws: The Revenge would earn a paltry $20.7 million. Too bad Sid lost $2.3 million on its theatrical run, not including marketing and theater profits. However, Hollywood was smarter back in the 80s, and VHS rentals and sales would eventually make up for the millions lost in comparison to the movie's budget. When I would finally rent this movie from the video store, as a 15-year-old skateboarder, my immediate thoughts were confused and then frustrated. It was analogous to a straight-to-video movie, and Ellen Brody, which is a character I loved, was just a different character. In the first two films, she was a rock who gave strength to her husband and kids while having the power to put others in their place forcefully.
I was only thinking if everyone's interested.
I don't give a damn what you're thinking. All I know is a boy is dead and my son and husband are still out there.
She was a multifaceted character that was complex. She didn't need to speak to convey what she thought. You saw it in the calm, slow scenes that focused on character moments. In this film, she's just paranoid knowing she has to fight a shark on the water and always staring out into sea because she knows the script needs her to do this. The hell with staying on land where the shark can't get you. Let's go to the Bahamas by jet, where I'll hook up with a guy a short spell after the death of my husband and son. And you know what is genius about this script? The shark leaves Amity Shores when she leaves by jet to the Bahamas. And within a few days, the shark is there too. The sad thing is, I'm a big fan of Mario Van Peebles, especially from Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood.
You say hippie, man? Ain't been no hippies around here for centuries, man. Been freeze-dried or doing hard time.
He's also a great director. Just check out his New Jack City. Then there was Lance Guest, who I adored in The Last Starfighter. I can't believe this is what they offered these two talented men to play. And don't get me started thinking about Michael Caine being in this film. Now, there are some cool cameos in this film, like Melvin Van Peebles, the awesome director of the 70s film like Sweetback's Badass Song. You can also see Alex Kittner's mom in Amity from the first film, and Miss Taft, but that didn't make me jump up and down salivating. You're going to need better member varies than that, movie. The film was just unbelievable both visually and story-wise, and they didn't even go into the voodoo stuff to explain it, like the book and the early scripts did. Without that silly story point, which I don't like either, the movie was devoid of any sense or narrative structure beyond, oh, I'm sad my hubby and kids are dead, and the shark is after me. Let's go kill it and jump in the sack. Then there is just the leaps in logic with a shark jumping out of the water, getting impaled, and Mario Van Peebles getting chomped by the shark, and at the end of the film being just fine, no problem. Just ignore my intestinal, lung, and organ ruptures.
Just a flesh wound.
This movie isn't a Pinto by any stretch of the imagination. It's a block of metal dumped at your doorstep, blocking you from leaving your front door. It has no purpose other than to say, well, that sucked. For those who follow my channel, you should be able to see why I stuffed both these movies into one video. Usually, when I make a series on a film, I spend about a month studying every detail about said film. I read the books, study the behind-the-scenes, documentaries, interviews, commentaries, even trading cards, and whatever else I can find. These two sequels can pass the time, but they do not inspire any desire to dig into their depths because they are so rushed or lazy. Still, there is nothing like cleansing a bad movie out of your system. So, next up will be The Truman Show, and hopefully there will be no more sequels to Jaws.
Shark still looks fake.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, but sharing helps more.